About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
This is Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, a longtime student of consciousness, along with cybernetics, anthropology, and other fields, and through this series of programs, I'm introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research, and I'll be explaining some of their ideas and experiments. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. And Noetics is spelled Noetic. We are now approaching 11 months since we started exploring the research of scientists trying to understand what consciousness is and does. Those very first few months, we looked backward at what had been done in the 20th century. Lately, we've been looking more at what's being done in the last dozen years or so. Over that time, we learned that most of what goes on in the mind is not in our conscious awareness at all, but goes on in unconscious processes. So our minds can be thought of as having three parts: what we're aware of, our personal awareness, what we aren't aware of that's keeping our bodies going, and which also includes our fears and beliefs about potential dangers and survival issues, and we call that the individual subconscious mind, and then what we aren't aware of that guides us in our actions, our hopes, our dreams, which we can call the individual superconscious. We've learned that we can change our state of consciousness and shift what we're aware of and capable of in each moment. We learned that while we can say where in the brain processes that direct the body are active, the responses in our body to both our individual mental activity and what's going on around us happen far faster than nerve impulses or chemicals can travel through the body, which means they aren't all originating in the brain. So it turns out that many scientists have come to accept that what we call mind is not the product of the electrochemical activity of the brain, but is in fact the activity of a kind of field that surrounds and permeates the body. That means that the brain is a receiver-transmitter, or transponder, receiving messages from the mind and transmitting them to the body, and receiving messages from the senses and transmitting them to the body and the mind. We also learned that the brain modifies what it receives from the senses and from the mind to fit past patterns of experience that are stored as hardwired connections or mental frameworks among the neurons. Other experiments have demonstrated that what we call the individual mind continues to function even when the brain and heart are flatlined and the person has been declared dead. Mind continues to perceive and process for as much as several hours before the brain and heart are returned to functioning again, which may be why most reports of that near-death experience, unquote, do not fit past patterns of experiences stored in the brain's neuronal connections. They're not being filtered by the brain. Mind, then, is a field, a pattern of informed energy that exists after the body is functioning as the superconscious, may exist prior to the body, and develops with the body and brain as the subconscious, and is being told by the brain what the world out there, the sensual perceptions, are. This is our personal awareness. Now, a field has a unique pattern of vibration that makes it different from other fields. And some experiments have demonstrated that people and animals who have minds that are vibrating along the same patterns are able to sense when the other is focusing attention on them or about to come home. Their minds share information and their bodies change when someone they're connected with turns attention their way. We also have experiments telling us that mind affects matter, starting with the basic building blocks of the universe, those subatomic elements which show up as energy or matter depending on whether a mind is present to observe them, as demonstrated in the famous double-slit experiments in quantum physics, which helps us to understand how bodies and environments shift and change as people change their thought processes, what they're focusing on in the personal awareness part of their consciousness, and the effectiveness of mental or spiritual healing, and what's called the placebo effect, how the belief of a care provider in a treatment can help a patient receiving that treatment experience healing. Based on all of this information, a growing number of scientists are seeing our individual mind as part of a larger field, a human noosphere, a global brain, or a collective consciousness. And more scientists are equating that larger field with the quantum or zero-point field out of which all matter and energy arises in the orderly system we call the universe. The research has also demonstrated that it's possible for us individually and collectively to enter into a state of consciousness in which all the body systems are in harmony with our essential mind, a state of coherence in which we feel peace and quiet joy, which then affects our own experience and the nature of the world around us. We can feel the various states of consciousness we operate from, so we can choose to enter the state of coherence that makes it possible for us to change the material experience around us. You can catch up on our past shows on the KXCR.net archives. Click on that little cloud on the banner at the top of the screen if you don't see the archives link. And on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where you'll also find links to the clips, books, and authors that I mention on the show. Today, we're going to explore the realm of experience we call thought. We know that mind is the source of our thought, but the brain has a way of latching on to some thoughts and playing them over and over again, structuring the ways the neurons fire, and so providing a filter through which future thoughts and perceptions are taken in. Let's listen to what Deepak Chopra has to say about thought and what it does.
First, discuss how thought is created. Our fundamental experience of perceptual reality is the entanglement of sensations, sense perceptions, other sensations, images, feelings, and finally thought. So, thought is the interpretation of experience. Once again, thought is the interpretation of experience. As I mentioned, raw experience is just sensations. Whether they're sense perceptions or they're images, they're still sensations on the screen of consciousness. And thought is also a subtle sensation on the screen of consciousness, but it is the interpretation of perceptual activity. And actually, perceptual activity is a result of giving meaning to raw experience, to sensations. As soon as we give meaning to a raw experience, sensation, it becomes an object. So this is as an object of an iPhone, but as modalities of experience, it is sensations. All kinds of sensations, okay? All kinds of sensations. As a modality of experience, it is sensations. But then as a construction of perception, it is iPhone, given meaning to sensations by humans. So in other words, Perception is a learned phenomenon, and every perception is filtered through the conditioned mind, through meaning. But meaning in turn is what you believe in, what you hold to be true. So every perception is filtered through belief, meaning, and it's given a name, and then it becomes a form out there. But actually it's an experience in consciousness that goes along with the experience that we call the body. Okay, the body and this are created simultaneously.
For those of you who are not aware, Deepak Chopra has been very active in helping people understand there is far more to our experience than simple body actions. He was the son of a cardiologist, trained as an endocrinologist, worked at many levels in hospitals and so on, and then discovered that some of the people he was working with were having experiences that his medical school training did not explain. And he went on a search, and we get to benefit from it. Now, Chopra has gone on from this notion that the experiences that we have are moderated by and interpreted by our thoughts, and that is the primary function of thought, to explain that through thought, everything that we experience is brought forth. I'll let him talk about that.
Through interpretation of sensations. What is the purpose of thought? Well, human thought created the human universe, everything from stars, galaxies, and Empire State Building, to latitude, to longitude, to Greenwich Mean Time, to nation states, to empires, to colonialism, to money, to Wall Street. All this is the product of thought. Thought created the human experience of the human universe. That is amazing, right? That the interpretation of a sensation is responsible, or a bunch of sensations is responsible for what we call human civilization.
So thought is the means by which we experience and the means by which we create. Everything, as Chopra said, that existed first in thought, and through thought came into being. Actions were a function of the thought process. So there's a lot of folks out there today who are teaching people ways to allow the thought intention, the desire, the inner sense of possibility to become explicit in our life experience and to help us consciously choose what we are creating. And I'm going to give you a couple of those here in this next couple of presentations. The first one is from a guy who was doing this work in the 40s and 50s, and there's a lot of YouTubes out there. His name is Neville Goddard, and he's giving some folks an exercise to do for the evening.
Make it a lovely goal, either for yourself or for another. For any time that you exercise your imagination lovingly on behalf of another, you're mediating God to that other. So, bring a friend before your mind's eye. Represent him to yourself as the man or the woman that you would like them to be. And don't tell them, ask for no praise, just assume that they're talking to you and telling you the most marvelous news about themselves. And you congratulate them on that good news. And go your own way. Believe in the reality of that imaginal act. It may happen tomorrow. It may happen a day after, or a week later, or a month later. It has its own appointed hour, and it is ripening, and it's going to flower. So don't be concerned. Leave it alone, and it will come to pass. So this is what I mean by feeling is the secret. I catch the mood, the feeling that would be mine if I were what I want to be. I don't have to touch something. I can if I want to. But it's the mood I'm speaking of. What would the feeling be like if she were well? If she were this? And then you catch it, just as though it is true. You always go to the end, and the end is where you begin. We're always imagining ahead of our evidence. So go to the end and feel the end, and then dwell in that end, even though reason denies it and your senses deny it.
So Goddard's experience and teaching is that what we are imagining clearly, in detail, in the present moment, with feeling and joy and love and appreciation, must come into our experience, sometimes immediately. Sometimes, if there are other things in our thought processes that keep it from being immediate, it may take a while those get eroded. But Neville Goddard, Goddard, is a very powerful teacher of this method of bringing our thoughts into our experience. Another teacher who's been very popular since the movie The Secret is a man named Bob Proctor.
There's where you are right now. That's the yellow line. That represents the level of consciousness you are on. That represents what you're hearing when I'm talking to you. Okay? Now, this up here is where we've never been. That's where we really want to go. See, our heart is always causing us to want to go higher, further, okay? Faster even. What we should do is stop and remember how we got to where we are. There were lessons here. If we would pay attention, we'd see how we move from one frequency to the next. We know we're here. How did we get here? Well, let's stop and review. Do you remember you took the chances? You bet on yourself. There was no physical proof that you could do it, but you went there and you did it. So what you got to do now is go off up here and see yourself already there. You see, what you've got to realize what you've done is you've raised your level of conscious awareness. If nothing's created or destroyed, everything's already here, if not in one state, in another. Now, where your mind has stayed here on this line, where you are, mentally you've gone up here. And you get up there mentally and you're going to start to attract everything from that higher frequency. And of course you can go higher if you want. There's no end to where we can go.
What Proctor is helping us to understand is that we are in the habit of thinking we can't, rather than in the habit of exploring what we can be and do and have, and being open to how that might happen. He and Goddard both are saying we need to be, feel, and immerse our awareness in the experience of that which we intend to be experiencing more of in the future. This is a process of changing our state of consciousness, changing it from the thought cycles that the mind likes to wrap itself around in. Remember that normal thought structure that we talked about months ago, into a state of consciousness that is more coherent with who and what we truly are. As Neville Goddard pointed out, the lovingness, as Proctor pointed out, the heart desires. And we see this in a number of spiritual teachings, that we need to go to the heart to discover what it is we are ready to experience, and then feel that experience with great love, appreciation, and gratitude in order to have that experience more fully. Those of you who follow Esther Hicks Abraham are very familiar with this idea. That term that they invented called the vortex is an attempt to get us there, because the emotions of having received and experienced that which we are ready to create and experience is how we tune ourselves to the frequency of the experience. And as Proctor pointed out, sometimes that's several layers beyond or levels beyond our current state of consciousness and experience. We normally go from now at this point to a book, and I'm not going to actually do a book, although I'm referring to a book this time. You may have heard of the journalist Lynn McTaggart. She spoke in the movie The Secret and in a number of other movies about that time. She was one of the first writers to popularize the idea of a field and of the role of mind in that field. She went on to explore ways that individuals and groups could focus intention within that field in a series of experiments that are documented in her book, The Intention Experiment, and on her website, to which she is regularly adding, which is theintentionexperiment.com. Now, one of Lynn's principles is that a group of people enhance the power of any intention. That is, she has found that a group of 8 people are able to help each other sustain that sense of beingness that we talked about a few minutes ago, and to therefore reinforce each other's intention. Her power of 8 groups now have been working around the world for nearly a decade to make a difference in all kinds of situations. Here's some of the research she's working from. I'm going to read from her website. This is from the website lynnmctaggart.com/group intention of field effect. This was written a number of years ago, and she's talking about 2 studies. She says 2 studies that caught my eye seem to answer fairly basic questions about the nature of the social group and the power of the social contract, and how this is all related to the power of group intention. She talks about a study out of the University of Chicago, the Institute for Mind and Biology. And, the subject was mice, as she points out. It could have been done on humans, but they studied the genetic expression in mouse mammary tumors over time. And they discovered that the mice that had been isolated grew far larger tumors. They were also found to have developed a disrupted stress hormone response and behavior indicative of chronic stress. This totally fits with Norman Cousins' research around support groups for people who are dealing with the symptoms of cancer. Back to her writing, the researchers then wished to examine the precise biological consequences of the stressful environment. When they studied the gene expression in the mouse mammary tissue over time, they found altered genetic expression levels of the metabolic pathway genes in the isolated mice. The environment had altered the ways in which their genes were turned on. This is epigenetics. Classic case of how the experience we are in is affecting which portions of our DNA molecules are actually working in the cell. That's what we mean when we say turning on a gene. Another experiment that she describes on this page is, I then came upon another extraordinary study at Oxford University. In this instance, a group of anthropologists from the Institute of Cognitive and Evolutionary Anthropology asked a group of 12 rowers to work out in a virtual boat in a gym used for normal training. In 4 tests, they were to row continuously for 45 minutes. First, as members of one of 2 teams of 6, and then in separate sessions as individuals. After each session, the scientists measured the rowers' pain thresholds by measuring how long they could tolerate an inflated blood pressure cuff on the arm. Although the rowers evidenced increased pain tolerance after every one of the sessions, they had significantly larger tolerance to pain after the group training, as compared with the effect of exercising individually. Lynn McTaggart goes on to say the real takeaway message here is the extraordinary power of the group. These 2 studies support the central thesis of the intention experiment, that group intention creates, in essence, a sacred circle that magnifies the effect. To my mind, she says, these 2 studies together answer some vital questions about the power of group intention to ramp up the effect of individual thought. Indeed, she says, it appears necessary for survival. In the case of the mice, the social group created a field that proved protective of cancer. In the case of the rowers, the group created a field that magnified individual efforts and overrode individual limitations. Within the field, the whole was greater than the sum of its parts. Well, if you just tuned in, you are listening to Noetic Moments on KXCR 90.7 on the FM dial and streaming on KXCR.net. And that sound tells me we need to look at what's going on in the world today and what you, the listeners, are curious about. But we're out of time. We spent too much time on other people today. So send me your emails if you have questions. I'm happy to address them on the air. And I will continue to scan the news for relevant news items. Well, that's it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll look at more of the research being done in an attempt to understand what consciousness is, what it really does, and how we can experience life differently when we use our consciousness fully. We are out of time for today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, www.noeticmoments.org, where there's a list of the titles and other resources we refer to on the show, along with archived past shows, and a form that you can use to send me your comments and questions. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio 90.7 FM in Florence, Oregon. And have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.